Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we're going to talk a little bit about lineages and lines and the significance that they do and do not have in Gardnerian Wicca. It's something that you see a lot if you hang out in like the seekers groups online or anything like that. You see people coming in, really genuinely meaning well, but you see people coming in saying things like, "Hi, I'm located in, whatever, Gloucestershire, and I am looking for a coven, and I want a coven that is Sheffield line." And that's not how that works, for a couple of reasons. One is the covens that are around you are just the covens that are around you. It's not like you're going shopping and you're looking for a particular brand. You are looking to make connections with a group of people who are hopefully within traveling distance of you, with whom you can participate in a particular kind of religious and magical community. And the idea that you would specify wanting a particular lineage is just like it. It makes us on the other side of the initiatory fence kind of laugh. And to be clear, this is a thing that I absolutely did as a seeker, right? When I was a seeker in the United States, I wanted a coven that was Long Island line. And I thought that I had good reasons for wanting that, right? I had a rough understanding that Long Island line was the largest lineage in the United States of Gardnerian Wicca, and I had, we'll talk about those ideas a little later in the video, but like I had a thought that the Long Island line would be a particular way of doing Gardnerian Wicca, and that would be most suited to my interests. And in hindsight, I had no good reason to think that, because I didn't know anything about initiatory Wicca, and I didn't know anything about ostensible differences between lines or between covens, or what basic Wiccan practice looks like to begin with in a way that would allow me to have a nuanced understanding of what the variations on that practice might be. So I, as a seeker, came in with this idea that, I want Long Island line Wicca. I guess because I thought there was a brand recognition associated with that. We'll talk about that, like I said, in a little bit. But really, as an outsider, I had no way of distinguishing between lines or lineages or understanding what potential distinctions would be. Like, it was all kind of meaningless to me. And I did end up in a Long Island line coven, but that didn't matter, and it shouldn't have mattered. That wasn't a thing that affected my training experience. So a little bit of background and context. A lot of this is private. A lot of this is stuff that I don't really consider appropriate to discuss online, sort of in public with people who aren't members of the initiatory community. But broadly speaking, Wicca is a lineaged initiatory cult. So I can trace my lineage through my initiator to the person who initiated her, to the person who initiated them, so on, all the way back in a chain that goes back to Gerald Gardner. And that lineage is significant in a certain way. But I think that the way that lineage is significant is different from what it might appear to be from the outside. So, for starters, what is lineage? What is the purpose of lineage? Lineage is the passing of a particular magical current through a set of shared rites and experiences in a way that brings people into the community of our priesthood. Initiation serves a couple of purposes, but really there are three primary purposes that I think initiation serves. One is personal transformation. Initiation changes you fundamentally. Two is magical act, right? Initiation magically makes you a member of the priesthood, puts you in communication with a particular set of gods, gives you access to a certain kind of magical current, magical power that is, and I mean power here not in the sense of like, I am more powerful than other witches, because that's nonsense, but just in the sense of like, there's a particular flavor of magic that you find in the Gardnerian community and the Alexandrian community and so on, and you don't find that flavor of magic among people who don't belong to that initiatory current. It's very hard to put a finger on exactly what that is, but it's there. So the initiation serves a personal transformative purpose, it serves a magical purpose, and then thirdly, initiation also serves a social purpose. Initiation sort of introduces you to a community and has an effect of other people who are in that community recognizing you as one of them. And that is what Lineage is and does. Lineage serves those three purposes simultaneously. So I was initiated according to a certain set of initiatory rites by someone who was initiated according to that same set of initiatory rites by someone who was initiated, and so on and so forth, going straight back to Gerald Gardner. And that builds a community, that builds a particular kind of magical oomph. There is a magical thing that is passed in the initiation, right? There is a sense of like, you are now magically a part of this thing that is our lineage of initiatory Wicca. That thing is Lineage, and it's so hard to describe in more concrete terms. But that's kind of all that Lineage is. Lineage is the story of how you came to be in the craft. And for some people, that story is complicated, right? Some people, get their initiation from this coven over here, and then they move across the country and they join a different coven and they get their second degree from a coven over there, and those two covens had different lineages, and so the story of how this person came to be in the craft, the story of how they came to be the person that they are as a member of this priesthood, as a member of this magical community, can be complicated, and it can be sort of this branching, gnarled family tree that sometimes crosses back over itself, and you see people construct Gardnerian family trees, and there will be weird things where like you are your own brother, or someone is her own like great aunt, or like all kinds of weird things can happen because these stories about how we come to be part of the community, the social community, the magical community, and the sort of personal status of transformation that accompanies initiation, those stories are complicated. It's a common thing among some covens to say, if you ask me my lineage, I will tell you a story. And the point of it is that it is a story. The point of it is that it's kind of the history of how the craft came up to the point where it is now as it lives in you. I think that from the outside, people sometimes perceive lineage and lines in the craft to be more like picking softball teams. I think sometimes there's this idea of like, oh, well, I really like Patricia Crowther's books, so I want to find a coven that is downline from Patricia Crowther, because then I will be like better or more witchy or more legitimate or whatever. But like, I want to have this lineage because I think it will reflect well on me. That's not what lineage is. That's not part of the function that lineage serves. Lineage allows us to identify each other. It allows us to confirm that someone is in fact who they say they are, that they are in fact a member of this community. But then more broadly, it's just it's your family tree. It's the story of how you got here. And the point is not to go hunting for the best possible family tree. The point is to find your way into the craft in the way that is right for you, and then to honor the story of how you found your way into the craft by recognizing the lineage of people who came before you. A thing that is very, very often said to seekers, and that really I can't reiterate enough how true it is that when you're looking for a coven, the most important thing is that you find the people you click with. The absolute most important thing is that you find a coven full of people that you like, full of people that you trust, full of people that you want to do magic with, and people who you consider wise, people who you think are going to sort of cultivate the right kind of moral character in you. Those are the things that matter the most when you're looking for a coven. And lineage, like, oh, well, you were initiated by someone who came from this branch of the Gardnerian, like, that doesn't and shouldn't matter. As long as someone is a legitimate Gardnerian, is a member of this community, the specifics of their lineage shouldn't be a factor in you trying to choose which covens you want to reach out to and potentially train with. What matters is the people and the magic and the connection that you have with them and with the gods. There is a story that is kind of true and mostly not true, as is the case with all of the popular narratives in Wicca. There is a story about Long Island line, Gardnerian Wicca in particular. As I said earlier, the Long Island line is the largest lineage in the US, and it's the lineage that sort of arrived first in the United States. And there's this idea that people commonly have, that Long Island line sort of crystallized. This is an effect that you see with diasporas, kind of generally speaking. If you talk to Italians in Italy, their culture, their cuisine, their language will look very different from what Italian Americans talk about as being sort of, quintessentially Italian. You go to Brooklyn and you talk to someone's nonna, and she is going to speak Italian to you, but she's going to speak Italian in the dialect that her grandparents brought over from Italy, and it's going to be very different from the Italian that is, maybe not very different, but it's going to be noticeably different from the Italian that is still spoken in Italy today, because the idea is that the Italian in Italy has continued to live and grow and evolve, and it has changed over time. Whereas the Italian that the immigrants brought with them to America in the Italian diaspora crystallized because people were terrified of losing the culture of the old country. And so they stopped making any changes. Nothing was dynamic, nothing grew, and therefore you have sort of a fossilized version of it, as opposed to the more living and dynamic thing that happens in the homeland. And you see this in discussions of diasporas of all kinds. And that is not an entirely accurate narrative about diaspora in general, because diasporas inevitably interact with the communities that are around them, wherever they end up, and they both affect and are affected by those other communities, right? So I think a really good example is thinking about things like Vodou or Santeria, or these African diaspora traditions. These are religious traditions that come from West Africa, but that have been strongly influenced by the presence of folk Catholicism, by the culture of enslaved people in the Americas, and by a number of other influences that have changed those traditions and have changed those practices. So it's not the case that Santeria is, a crystallized, unchanged version of the living tradition that continues to exist in Nigeria. It is that it's changed in different ways. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. Thinking about Wicca specifically, there is an idea that you sometimes hear that, Wicca in Britain continued to grow and evolve, and Wicca, when it came to the US, crystallized because of this diaspora effect. And that's kind of true and kind of not. Americans are famously sort of more obsessed with rules, more obsessed with, a sense of things being done by the book and so on. And like, some of that can potentially be attributed to a diaspora effect. Some of that, I think, can be attributed to the effects of particular influential people in the history of the craft in America who had their own individual approaches to doing certain things. But then also, like, that narrative that the craft crystallized when it came to the US is also very much not true, because there are ways in which things changed in the US that are different from how they changed in Britain, but that are not original or endemic to the craft, right? The craft continued to undergo evolution and development because all communities do, and it just underwent different changes than the kinds of changes that were experienced in the UK or in continental Europe or in Australia or elsewhere. And one of the really interesting things about recent years is, with the rise of the internet, and particularly the rise of social media, people who were previously isolated from each other have had chances to reconnect, and American Gardnerians have had the opportunity to talk to European Gardnerians and vice versa, and learn from each other, and there's a lot less of that kind of isolating effect, which I think blurs the lines between a lot of these distinctions. So, I mean, that's just a thing to think about, is there are narratives, I think, that we sometimes tell ourselves, particularly from the outside, particularly when you're a seeker and you're looking for the Gardnerian tradition and you want to do it right because, right, you want to get the real Gardnerian Wicca. And there is this temptation to try to hunt down whatever you think the most legitimate lineage is going to be. And when I was seeking, I hunted down Long Island line Gardnerian Wicca because I had this idea that Wicca came to the US and crystallized, so this would be kind of, in a sense, the most authentic or the most original version of Wicca. And again, in hindsight, that was just flatly not true. Wicca has continued to evolve everywhere because that is what it does. And also, the idea that something having evolved makes it less authentic, makes it less legitimate, is fraught and problematic, and we should maybe think critically about those kinds of narratives and the way that those narratives are, in particular, like, weaponized by people who are trying to claim more authority or more legitimacy than others, even when those people are the ones who are most likely to do bizarre things that no one else has ever heard of. Like, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to spill tea, because I'm not that much of a bitch, and I do actually have an oath to keep. But pretty consistently, I find that the people who are the loudest about having the correct and authentic and only true original version of Gardnerian Wicca are the ones who do the weirdest shit that no one else has ever heard of. Like, they do weird stuff. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point is that Lineage, from the outside, looks like it's wrapped up with legitimacy or authenticity. It looks like it tells you a lot about those kinds of things, and in fact, it really doesn't. And part of that is because, like, lineages, everything has changed constantly, always and everywhere, because every community undergoes changes. That's just a fact about human community. And the changes that happened in America in the 1970s are different from the kinds of changes that you saw in Britain in the 1970s, but it doesn't make one better than the other. And the more important thing, rather than focusing on lineage, is that you focus on finding the people that you really click with and that you want to do magic with. And the final thing that I'll say about lineages is that there is so much variation between covens that lineage is really not a helpful predictor of what a coven's practice is going to look like, especially, again, with the rise of social media and the increased intercommunication between covens of different lineages. There's a whole lot of people coming up with, variations of their own, or borrowing things from a coven from another lineage, or so on, so that there's really no reliable way to say, oh, well, all covens in this lineage do this. Because I guarantee you there are some covens that have that lineage that don't do that. or that covens that do that, but that aren't part of that lineage and started doing it because, someone came and did ritual with them and was like, oh, wow, that's super cool, and took it back to their coven and started doing it. There's a lot of cross-pollination. I think there's a lot more cross-pollination than people realize. And it's not, lineage is not this, like, deterministic thing that tells you for sure what a coven's practice is going to be. Each coven finds its own way of doing things. And there will be a lot of things that they do that are similar to, their parent coven or the covens that are around them. But there will be a lot of things that they do that are matters of personal preference and innovation. Or, again, are things that they kind of magpied off of someone else as they're fitting together what feels right for them in ritual. There's just so much variation. And ultimately, lineage is really not the thing that determines that variation, right? My grandma may have made the pasta sauce in a particular way, but if you come over to my house, maybe the base recipe that I'm working from is the recipe that she shared. But also, maybe I don't like oregano as much as she did, so there's going to be less oregano in my pasta sauce. And maybe I, had dinner once at someone's house and they, rather than using canned tomatoes, used fresh tomatoes and whatever. But the point is, knowing even if you know what my grandmother's pasta sauce was like, that doesn't actually tell you for sure what my pasta sauce is going to be. So lineage is just really an unhelpful thing to focus on in those respects. Again, lineage serves to identify us as members of a community, which serves an important social function. It passes a kind of magical continuity that we all have, and it's this magical thing that makes us belong, not just in this sociological sense, but in a very deep magical way. And it enables particular individual transformations within each initiate. Beyond that, though, I think lineage is a lot less than people think that it is. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm going to wrap it up here. I try not to go over 25 minutes because people only ever watch 6 minutes at a time anyway. Thank you for watching. I will catch you sometime soon. Until next time.